Michael Jordan saw a young fan crying courtside. What he did during the timeout made the whole stadium cheer. The Chicago Bulls were on a winning streak. The crowd in the United Center was electric as the game against the Washington Bullets unfolded. With every dribble, every pass, and every dunk, the fans erupted in excitement. Michael Jordan, the man everyone came to see, was in his prime, playing with the intensity that had made him a household name. The energy in the stadium was contagious, sweeping across every section, making even the most casual fans feel like they were a part of something bigger. In the front row, a young boy sat with his father. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old, his bright eyes wide with excitement at the chance to see his idol play in person. But as the game wore on, the boy's smile began to fade. It wasn't because the Bulls were losing, they were actually dominating the game, but something else was eating away at him. His father noticed the change but didn't say anything. He could see the boy's mind drifting, the way his gaze moved from the court to the floor, as if he was trying to process something heavy. The boy's father gave him a comforting squeeze on the shoulder. "You okay, buddy?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. The boy nodded but didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was stuck on the thoughts that had been haunting him all week. The recent loss of his mother had left a void in his heart that nothing seemed to fill. It wasn't that he didn't love his father, it was just that everything felt different now. There were moments when he'd look around and everything seemed fine, but then reality would hit, and he'd feel the loss all over again. He had promised his father he would be strong, that he would try to keep going as if everything was normal. But in moments like this, in a stadium full of people, with the cheers and the excitement, it only reminded him of the emptiness. He watched Michael Jordan on the court, watched a man who seemed untouchable, and wished he could feel that same power, that same confidence. As the game progressed, the boy found it harder to focus. The bright lights, the loud crowd, the cheering, it all seemed like noise, drowning out the silence inside him. A few tears slid down his face, unnoticed by the people around him. His father kept trying to comfort him, but it felt like nothing was reaching him. The boy looked up at his father, but the words he wanted to say were locked inside, buried under a weight too heavy for someone his age to carry. The game continued. Jordan's shot after shot seemed effortless, his moves a blur of brilliance. The crowd was on its feet as the Bulls pulled further ahead. But none of it mattered to the boy. The more he tried to focus on the game, the more the hole in his heart seemed to widen. He didn't want to cry, not here, not in front of so many people, but the tears came anyway. It wasn't until Jordan made a particularly impressive play, a soaring dunk that seemed to defy gravity, that the boy's emotions finally broke free. The game continued on, the roar of the crowd deafening, but the boy's sobs were loud in his ears. His chest tightened, and the tears came faster. He clutched his father's arm but didn't know how to make the pain stop. Jordan, amidst the cheers and fanfare, glanced up into the stands. His eyes scanned the crowd, something familiar drawing his attention to the boy in the front row. At first, it was just a quick glance, but then he stopped, his gaze lingering. Jordan's focus shifted entirely from the game for a brief moment, and it wasn't lost on the people around him. A few others noticed him looking towards the boy, but the moment passed quickly. The game was still in full swing, the players still moving fast, and the crowd still on fire with energy. But Jordan wasn't fully present in the game anymore. Something about the boy, about the way he was so lost in his grief, stuck with him. Jordan had seen pain before. He had faced his own challenges, battles that no one else could understand. The loss, the pressure, the weight of expectations, it was something he knew all too well. But seeing a child so visibly broken, someone so young, someone who should be living a carefree life, was something different. Jordan didn't hesitate. He signaled to the bench, and without another word, he walked off the court. The crowd's cheers faltered for a moment as they tried to understand what was happening. It wasn't a typical move for a player of his caliber, especially in the middle of a game that the Bulls were winning. The referee raised an eyebrow, unsure how to proceed, but Jordan was already on his way to the sideline, his focus unwavering. His teammates didn't know what to think. Dennis Rodman glanced at the coach, who shrugged, equally baffled. But there was no mistaking the seriousness in Jordan's steps. He wasn't in the mood for applause or recognition. He was doing something that had nothing to do with basketball. He reached the boy, kneeling down to meet him at eye level. The game continued in the background, but in that moment, everything else seemed to fade away. Jordan didn't say a word at first. He simply placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his touch warm, reassuring. The boy looked up, his tear-streaked face hesitant, confused. "Hey, buddy," Jordan said quietly, his voice calm yet firm. "You don't have to carry all that alone, okay?" The words didn't make everything better, but for the first time in a while, the boy felt seen. His sobs began to slow, and for a brief moment, he felt the weight of his grief ease. He couldn't explain it, but Jordan's presence gave him a sense of comfort. The crushing isolation that had filled him for days seemed to lift just a little bit. Jordan smiled, a knowing, quiet smile, and nodded. He didn't rush the moment. There was no need to. He could see that the boy was still carrying a lot, but just this small act of kindness, of acknowledging him, was enough. He stood up, offering the boy a hand. "You hang in there, okay?" The boy nodded, wiping away the last of his tears. As Jordan turned back to the court, the crowd began to realize what had just happened. The arena, which had been filled with the sound of the game, was now eerily quiet, save for the soft murmurs of appreciation that spread throughout the stands. The boy looked at his father, and for the first time in days, he felt like there was hope. The game was still happening, but the emotional weight had shifted. Michael Jordan had done something no one expected, something that transcended the game itself. The boy, still processing what had just occurred, felt a quiet sense of relief. The night had changed for him, not because of the game, but because of the unexpected kindness that had been shown to him in his darkest moment. The cheers that followed Jordan's return to the court were louder than ever, but the boy didn't hear them. He was lost in his own thoughts, wrapped up in the kindness that had just reached him. He knew this night would stay with him forever. The game resumed, but the energy in the stadium had shifted. The excitement, once driven solely by the game, now had an emotional weight to it. Fans whispered to one another, some still unsure what had just happened with Michael Jordan walking off the court. Even the players seemed a little distracted, their heads swiveling toward the sidelines, wondering what had possessed Jordan to step away mid-game. But Jordan was back on the court now, and the intensity with which he played spoke volumes. His every move was sharp and calculated, his eyes locked on the game as if nothing had happened. He didn't show any sign of the brief moment he had spent off the court, kneeling by the boy. But in the back of his mind, that moment lingered. The boy's face, the tears, the sadness, it had all hit Jordan harder than he expected. As the Bulls moved forward, Jordan's presence on the court felt different. The crowd, who had been unsure at first, now erupted into cheers with every basket he made. It wasn't just the usual admiration for a player at the top of his game. There was a deeper respect now, a recognition of something beyond basketball. They were witnessing not just the athletic brilliance of Michael Jordan, but a glimpse into his humanity. The Washington Bullets were doing their best to hold their ground, but the Bulls, fueled by the surge of energy that had come from Jordan's brief interaction with the young fan, began to pull ahead. Every play seemed to be executed with precision. The ball moved faster, the shots went smoother, and the defense was tougher. Jordan was a man possessed. His mind, however, was not entirely focused on the game. There was something that was pulling his attention away every now and then, a lingering thought about the boy. The boy, sitting in the front row, now looked different. His tears had dried, his posture was straighter, and there was a faint smile on his face as he watched the game unfold before him. His father, still sitting beside him, was visibly relieved. He had seen the change in his son almost instantly. After Jordan had approached him, the boy's energy shifted, and his sadness seemed to have been momentarily replaced by something else, something lighter. The boy's father had always known his son was a sensitive child, the kind who wore his heart on his sleeve. Losing his mother had hit him hard, but he never imagined it would affect him like this. They had come to the game hoping it would be a distraction, a brief escape from the heaviness of their lives. He had never expected something as simple as Michael Jordan walking off the court to change everything. He watched as his son's eyes followed Jordan's every move, and for the first time in weeks, the boy seemed to be genuinely engaged, even laughing softly at one of Jordan's famous antics on the court. In the stands, fans were still talking about what had happened. Some questioned whether Jordan's actions had been too much, but the general consensus was clear: what he had done was extraordinary. It wasn't just the skill of a basketball player that made Jordan great, it was his ability to connect with people, to reach them in a way few athletes ever could. In a world where athletes were often seen as untouchable figures, Jordan had just reminded everyone that he was human, too. As the game clock ticked down and the end of the third quarter approached, the Bulls had built a solid lead. But even as Jordan delivered a couple of crucial shots, making the crowd go wild, his mind kept drifting back to the boy. The look on his face when they had shared that moment, the sense of relief, the way his posture had softened, was something Jordan couldn't shake. He had seen that kind of grief before, the kind that gnawed at you from the inside. And he knew, just from a glance, that the boy wasn't just grieving a loss. There was something more, a sense of not knowing where to turn, not knowing how to deal with the weight of it all. Jordan knew what it felt like to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. He had dealt with his own losses, his own moments of doubt, and his own battles with expectations. But what he hadn't experienced, what the boy was experiencing, was the pure loss of innocence. A child shouldn't have to feel the way that boy had felt. It wasn't fair. The whistle blew, signaling the end of the third quarter, and the players retreated to the sidelines. The crowd buzzed with excitement, but there was a quiet hum of anticipation in the air as well. Jordan's actions, his brief but powerful moment with the boy, had changed the dynamic of the game in ways no one could have predicted. As Jordan sat on the bench, his head leaned back against the backrest, his gaze still on the court but distant. The Bulls' coach, Phil Jackson, stood by, watching him carefully. Jackson knew Jordan well enough to understand that something had shifted in his star player, something that had nothing to do with basketball. The coach didn't ask questions. He simply let the moment unfold, knowing that when Jordan was ready, he would speak. During the break, Jordan's teammates, notably Scottie Pippen, made subtle comments about his demeanor. They had all seen him walk off the court, and they had all seen the change in him since then. Pippen, ever the quiet observer, asked, "You okay, man?" Jordan simply nodded, but there was a quiet sadness in his eyes. He wasn't okay. Not really. He was fine to continue the game, of course, but deep down, he knew he wasn't just playing for the win anymore. This game, this night, had turned into something much more personal. The fourth quarter started, and with it, a newfound determination from the Bulls. Jordan led his team onto the court with focus and intensity, but this time, there was a fire in him that hadn't been there before. Every basket, every play, was punctuated by his newfound sense of purpose. But despite the overwhelming talent of the team, the Washington Bullets weren't going to make it easy. They fought back hard, managing to cut the lead, making the last few minutes of the game a tense battle. But no matter how close it got, Jordan wasn't going to let this one slip away. Not after everything that had happened. With less than a minute on the clock, the game was tied, and the pressure mounted. The crowd, once again on their feet, knew this was it, this was the moment that would define the game. As the ball was passed to Jordan, his eyes scanned the court. His heart was racing, but there was no panic. Just the familiar calm of knowing what had to be done. He made his move, driving to the basket, his body moving with the same rhythm he had used countless times before. But this wasn't just about basketball. It was about something much more important. With the final seconds ticking down, Jordan made the shot. The ball sailed through the air and dropped cleanly into the basket. The buzzer sounded. The stadium erupted into cheers, but for Jordan, the true victory wasn't the win, it was the knowledge that in some small way, he had made a difference. He had reached out, not just to a fan, but to a human being who needed him. The boy, still sitting in the front row, stood up, his eyes wide with awe. The crowd's cheers were deafening, but the boy's focus was only on one thing, Michael Jordan. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't alone anymore. The stadium was alive with a deafening roar as the final buzzer echoed through the United Center. The Chicago Bulls had sealed the victory in a tense, nail-biting finish. Michael Jordan's game-winning shot had left the crowd in disbelief, but the celebration wasn't just about the win. It wasn't just about the points on the scoreboard or the trophy that would eventually be awarded at the end of the season. No, this moment had transcended all of that. Jordan stood at the center of the court, his arms raised, his face a mixture of satisfaction and something deeper, something more human. His teammates were all around him, celebrating, but even they couldn't deny the weight of what had just happened. They had won, sure, but there was something more profound happening in that arena. The crowd was still roaring, but Jordan's mind was elsewhere. He kept his eyes trained on the boy in the front row, who had been watching him the entire game. The boy was standing now, his hands clenched into fists, his face lit up with a look of joy. For the first time that night, he wasn't the boy who had cried in despair. He was just a kid again, caught up in the thrill of the game, cheering alongside thousands of other fans. His father, standing beside him, shared in that joy. He looked at his son and smiled, seeing the transformation that had taken place over the course of the game. This wasn't just about basketball, this was about the healing of a heart, the lifting of a burden. Jordan slowly walked towards the sideline, his gaze never leaving the boy. As he passed his teammates, they high-fived him, but there was a subtle understanding between them. They didn't need to say anything, they knew Jordan had given more than just a stellar performance on the court tonight. As he reached the sideline, Jordan walked over to where the boy and his father were standing. The boy looked up at him, his eyes wide, filled with something that wasn't sadness or grief. It was admiration. It was gratitude. "How are you doing, kid?" Jordan asked, his voice low but steady, as if picking up right where they left off. The boy looked at him, his lips trembling for a moment, but then he smiled. "I'm okay now, Mr. Jordan," he said softly. "Thank you." Jordan knelt down in front of him again, just like he had earlier, when the boy had been crying. He reached out, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "You're strong. You just needed to know that you're not alone in this." The boy nodded, his tears now gone. In their place was a sense of peace, a stillness that hadn't been there earlier. His father, standing behind him, placed a hand on his son's back, his eyes glistening with unshed tears of his own. The father had witnessed the transformation in his son, the moment that had shifted the boy's entire perspective on the night, on his grief, and perhaps on life itself. "Michael," the father said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've done something for him that I couldn't. You've given him hope." Jordan looked up at the father and gave him a small nod, as if acknowledging the weight of those words. But he didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked back down at the boy. "Remember this moment," Jordan said. "When things get tough, and life feels like it's knocking you down, remember tonight. You can come back from anything. Just keep going." The boy nodded once more, his eyes bright with newfound determination. "I will. I promise." Jordan smiled and stood up, his eyes briefly meeting the father's. He didn't need to say anything else, the understanding was there. Jordan had done what he needed to do, not as a basketball player, but as a human being. As a man who understood what it meant to struggle, to lose, and to find a way to keep moving forward. As the celebration continued in the arena, Jordan returned to the court to join his teammates. The atmosphere was electric, but for him, the game had already been won in a much more meaningful way. He didn't need the accolades, the cheers, or the recognition. What mattered was the connection, the impact he had on that boy's life. The boy and his father made their way up the aisle, leaving the arena amidst the crowd. The boy walked a little taller now, his eyes scanning the people around him, but this time, he wasn't overwhelmed by his grief. He wasn't carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders anymore. The emotional burden that had been crushing him just hours before had been lifted, not by a coach's pep talk or a victory on the scoreboard, but by the simple kindness of someone who took the time to notice, to care. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp. The streets were buzzing with people heading home from the game, still talking about the historic win, but the boy and his father walked in silence for a few moments. The father could sense the change in his son, and as they reached their car, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder once more. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice soft but firm. The boy looked up at him, his face now peaceful, a weight that had been holding him down for so long finally lifted. "I'm proud of me too, Dad." As they drove home that night, the father didn't say much. He didn't need to. The car was filled with a sense of quiet understanding, a calm that had been missing for far too long. The boy was finally starting to heal, and it was because of one moment in the middle of a basketball game, one moment of compassion from a man who didn't have to do anything, but chose to do everything. Back at the United Center, as the arena slowly emptied, the players celebrated their win in the locker room. But even they knew that this victory would go down as something much more than just a game. The Chicago Bulls had won, sure, but Michael Jordan had given the kind of victory that couldn't be measured in points or championships. It was a victory for the heart, for the soul. And it was a victory that would live on long after the final buzzer had sounded. The game was over, but the true impact of the night had just begun.